Hi, I'm James Valentine. This is Life's Booming. Grab a cuppa and get ready for an amazing story. Are you ready? Here we go.
In the late 1960s and in her early 20s, Gill Shaddick was living in Hong Kong, spending her spare time after work and on the weekends becoming an avid amateur sailor down at the local Army Sailing Club. One weekend, while she was set to compete in a sailing regatta held off Tai Po, just 25 kilometres north of Hong Kong City by land, and about 4 hours by boat, things went a little awry.
I'm so cold. I wrap myself up in a sleeping bag and lean against the engine. It's still warm. I'm lulled by the gentle rocking of the boat. The distant throb of a diesel engine jolts me out of my reverie. It doesn't add up. The cove was empty and we haven't seen another boat since we left Hong Kong harbour. Jim's head is cocked, listening too. We exchange a mystified look and both jump onto the cabin roof to get a better view. Against the shadowy hills, the dark outline of a big hulk is making straight for us. No lights, but fast, its bow wave shearing off sprays of foam sparkling white in the moonlight. Voices. Angry. Their engine is on full throttle. Mick yells, "We must be on their nets, let's move." We can see it now. It's a big fishing junk. The sails are furled, the hull square and bulky. Mick must be right. We've messed up their nets. Why are they screaming at us so loudly? Suddenly, white light blinds me. I can't see a bloody thing. Hands up, he shoots. It's not the Queen's English, but its meaning is unmistakable. In the movies, hands shoot up. Mine won't. They're trying to hug my chest, hold my heart. My knees are folding. I want to be small, not a target. Hands up, up, up. We shoot.
You stupid girl! Hands in the air!
My arms are lead. I've got to make them go up. The junk hits the yacht, throwing us down. Hands up! Hands up! I'm sprawled on the heaving deck, hanging on for dear life. How can I get my hands up now? I stay flat, sliding back until I feel the edge of the cockpit. Then I can squirm round and slide off the cabin roof. Twiggy grabs my arm and sits me down beside him. There are men swarming everywhere, holding guns, and all of them are screaming and shouting. My body has taken over, shuddering from head to toe. I feel Twiggy's body caking on one side and Mick on the other. Great tremors rolling through our bodies. Who are they, these men with guns? They're not in uniform. Just the hats are the same. The hats. Green hats with red stars. Red stars? Oh my God, we're in China. We're ordered down to the cabin and soon feel the tug and lag of being towed. We're down below with a gun-toting guard. No sporking. We look at each other, bewildered. After half an hour, we bump into what could be a pier. The shouting starts again. Out! 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 It's dark and we scramble onto a wooden jetty. Up ahead, I see the faintly lit outline of huts and low buildings against the hills. More shouting. Can't they ever just talk? Now the villagers are shouting too and running down the jetty. Look at the damage. I hear Jim's raised voice behind me. You hit our boat. He always was bloody-minded. What a time to pick a fight. The armed men shove him back on board. Go, says the head man, waving his pistol. What about Jim, says Mick. He okay, you go. Mick, Twiggy and I walk up the jetty. We're off to see the wizard, I whisper to the boys. Mick grins and links his arm through mine. Twiggy does the same, and we sing softly, then louder. We're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz.
The World News from Radio Hong Kong. 17 minutes past 7, and tonight's edition is introduced by Lynn Port.
An intensive air and sea search has failed to find any trace of the missing yacht Peter Ann and its crew of 4. The 4, 3 British soldiers and a European girl, were reported missing while on a sailing trip from Stanley to Tai Po. The main search was completed late this afternoon when the last of 4 search helicopters landed.
Well, as you know, since dawn this morning, we've had 2 Royal Navy minesweepers, 2 Royal Air Force Whirlwind helicopters, and 2 Army Air Corps Sues searching to the south and the east of the colony.
Do you intend to commit any more forces to this rescue search?
At the moment, as far as I know, no.
And the identity of the 3 soldiers and the girl?
Lance Corporals Hutchinson, Lance Corporal Louth, and Lance Corporal Darcy of the Duke of Wellington's regiment, and the young lady is Miss Gill Stevenson, who is a civilian in Hong Kong.
Major Keith Hoyle of the Joint Services Public Relations.
Wispy clouds obscure the moon, and I hold my breath until it reappears, shining brighter before it plunges into cloud again, bobbing through the sky, like us, through the waves below. "Hey up," says Twiggy. "There's a red light over there." He's pointing, and Mick's squinting. "A channel light? Can't be. Must be a shipping buoy, one of those big fellas." We're all staring at the small red glow. "I say let's head for it," suggests Mick. Anything afloat sounds like a good idea to me. Twiggy's got the binoculars out. Can he see anything? It's nearly dark. "I think there's another light. Could be what, Twiggy?" I say. "It's a ship." "A ship?" Mick opens the throttle. Out of the dusk, it's taking shape. It is a ship, a big grey ship, just there in the water, not moving. It's the Royal Navy. Mick shouts, "We're the Peter Ann from China, the yacht from China." Sounds silly, but what else can we say? We're close now, the wind pushing us up against the hull. Cold, grey-painted steel is towering above us. A rope ladder comes hurtling over the edge, and an unseen voice sings out, "Up you come!" "You first, Jill," says Mick. I hate heights. I hate gyms. Me first? You bet. Everything is moving. The rope takes my weight, and I start out okay, until the ladder swings out and my stomach drops. Back against the metal and my knuckles crunch. Ouch! I freeze and look down at the sea already far below. Twiggy shouts, "Don't look down! Go on, you can do it!" Now, I'm climbing like a marine, up and up and up. It's a long way, but I don't climb over the ship's railings. I fly, yanked up by 2 great big seamen with long muscular arms. My feet are on the deck, and I'm enveloped in the biggest, warmest hug of my life. Released, a smiling face says, "Welcome aboard, ma'am. I'm Kit Lehman. Welcome to HMS Hubbard's."
This is Gill Shaddick's story of No Regrets. Welcome, Gill.
Hello, James.
Were you the intrepid type? Was this normal for you at this time to take off onto some expedition on a yacht?
I hadn't thought of myself as the intrepid type. I just wanted to have a bit of adventure, but not really intrepid, no.
Right. I'm seeing this perhaps a little bit like sailing in Port Phillip Bay or sailing in Sydney Harbour. You were doing that kind of thing as part.
Yes, I had no idea the risks ahead.
Right, this is well beyond your usual thing. Well, let's see how all this started. Let's go back to, so it's 1969. Why are you in Hong Kong?
I was working in London. I'd had 3 jobs in my first year of work. I came from a very loving and supportive family. My father was an eminent physician, and he just couldn't understand why I didn't seem to be able to stick at a job. I'd had a poor school record. I couldn't spell. He was very worried about that. And I just needed to get away and to find myself and prove myself out of the way of the family's gaze, really.
That's a strong realisation, isn't it, for you to see that, to realise this is what I need.
Yes, and I just they were such loving, supportive parents. I mean, that was it. But I needed to get away.
And why Hong Kong? Is it started in 1969? Is that on Her Majesty's Secret Service, the James Bond film set in Hong Kong? Had you just seen that?
No, it was much more pragmatic than that. Hong Kong was a British colony then, so I didn't need a visa. I knew I wanted to go to the Far East because my grandfather had been there in 1908, and I'd never met him, but he'd brought back lots of treasures. So I had an idea of the Far East, and Hong Kong was the only one I could go to without visas.
So you jumped on a boat and went there, or how did you get yourself there?
No. In 1965, the film Dr. Zhivago came out, and it was a real blockbuster, and I had a Russian thing, so I elected to go by the Trans-Siberian Railway. I'm heading out from London. I get a train to Moscow, and then from Moscow you catch the Trans-Siberian, which takes 5 or 6 days to get to Nahodka, and then a small Russian boat took me to Hong Kong.
Let me just backtrack there a little bit. Like that's your journey. Why did you choose Hong Kong? Like, you then applied for jobs, is that right?
I got a friend lent me a business directory, and I applied for jobs with hotels and advertising agencies. And I got a slew of responses back saying that there were plenty of shorthand typists in Hong Kong and I would find it very difficult to get a job. But among all those, there was this one response which said that she was just looking for an English secretary for her advertising agency.
They wanted an English girl to be there.
She wanted an English girl, yes.
Okay, so then you think, I'll head out. And you took the Trans-Siberian Railway. Now now perhaps that sounds like a fairly normal tourist thing to do. Then it's still an adventure, right?
It certainly was. It was the Brezhnev era. It was the Cold War. And Russia was just opening up to tourists because it needed foreign currency. So there were only 5 non-Soviet bloc passengers on the train, and we were all travelling to jobs. It wasn't a tourist train in those days.
Yeah, right. It takes 5 or 6 days to cross Russia?
Yes.
Wow, what's that like?
It's fantastic. It stops every 15 minutes on the way, so it's very, very slow. And the compartments are allocated totally randomly. So I had one of the English couples and a Russian doctor in my compartment.
And then what, do you have to get off and find food at a cafe or something?
Yes, for foreigners there was a restaurant car, but they ran out of food quite quickly. So you just got out each stop and you bought tomatoes and bread and bottles of vodka, which were all in lemonade bottles because the alcohol wasn't allowed on the train.
Why is it stopping every 15 minutes?
Because that's the way people travel to get across Siberia. It's an old line. It's one track. Just stops approximately every 15 minutes.
I can get the Dr. Zhivago fantasy that you were living out there. And that ends up where? That ends up at?
Normally it ends up at Vladivostok, and then you can catch a line down through China, but that was closed at the time, and Vladivostok was closed at the time because it was a military port. So we went to Nahodka, which was just south of Vladivostok, and then a little Russian boat to Hong Kong.
Yeah, wow. Considering the very Englishness of the relationship in Hong Kong, then what you're describing, the lovely English girl going out, I mean, you should have got a nice P&O cruise, shouldn't you?
Well, that would have been, I think that would have been a bit tame.
Yeah. All right, so you arrive in Hong Kong. What's the job like? Where are you living? What's your life like when you first get there?
Mrs. Church, who was my new boss, she insisted that I stay with her to begin with. And it was fine for the first 48 hours. And then when I started work, she was a terrible bully. She was a huge character, larger than life, but she was an awful bully. And so the first thing I did was to pull my dictionary out and put it on my desk. And suddenly she roared, "Oh, God, can't you spell?" And that was the start of it. We never really got on.
Right. And then what was the rest of the life like? You were making friends? Was it I've often heard this about that sort of life in Hong Kong, even up until now, the expat kind of life is really fun.
I was very lonely at first. I didn't quite know how to make friends. It was difficult. I was living with her. It was very fraught. And then I moved out to a hostel. There weren't any other English or European girls working in my firm, so I found it a little bit hard to begin with. And in fact, I felt very homesick. And then I just decided I had to push myself out and join clubs and joined squash clubs and made friends and joined the sailing club.
You joined the sailing club because you were a keen sailor?
No, I couldn't swim.
Which I always think of as just part of the steps of sailing, swimming perhaps. How do you make the water so far?
I'd met a girlfriend. She was from Scotland, and she'd suggested that I go sailing with her. And when I said I couldn't swim, she just said, "Well, you better learn before we start." And that just seemed such a novel idea. But she said, "No, you can just learn those things." So she taught me to swim.
Yeah, isn't that great? But there's a great life lesson right there, isn't it? You can learn. You just because you can't, you can learn. So you did learn to swim, and then you learned to sail.
And then I went to sail. Yes.
Right. Okay. So what did you think you were doing on the day you set out? What were you meant to be participating in?
Oh, we were participating in local regattas, and normally we'd sail our dinghies round from the club, but Taipo was too far. So there was a yacht that had been lent to the club, and we decided that we would accept the invitation to Taipo. They were going to lend us dinghies, and so we'd sail over in the yacht, camp there for the night, and then come back the next day.
Yeah, fun. Fantastic.
Simple.
Yeah. And so when you accepted the invitation, it was your normal gang, was people you knew and all that sort of thing?
Yes, but then two of the people that I knew best dropped out, and the army major who'd sanctioned the trip insisted that we take a couple of experienced sailors. So I knew one of the boys very well, but the other two, I'd met one of them a couple of times, but the other one I hadn't met before. So, yeah.
How experienced were these experienced sailors?
Well, time told, didn't it?
And then, so you're going to sail to Taipo. Taipo is an island or on?
No, it's on the mainland.
Right. So you're going to sail up there. Usually, I mean, I don't do a lot of this sort of, well, I tell you what I do, sort of bushwalking. We check the weather. We have a good look at the weather before we head off. Did you check the weather?
That wasn't my job, but Mick, who was in charge, he didn't tell us until we were actually out at sea that there'd been an adverse weather report. And I suppose that was when the first penny began to drop, that perhaps he wasn't as experienced as I thought.
Right. Didn't quite know what adverse meant or the extent that adverse could be.
I mean, we were all so keen to go, and he just didn't want to disappoint us or he didn't want to be disappointed, so he just decided to go. He wasn't far. We'd be okay.
Yeah, she'll be right.
Yeah, she'll be right.
When does the storm hit? What's that like?
It was rough weather all the way, and then we thought that the wind would start dropping in the evening, but it didn't. It was picking up, and it was starting to get dark, and it started to get very rough indeed. Mick said we needed to put on our life jackets, and he decided that we needed to get the jib in and just sail on the mainsail. Twiggy elected to go and get the jib in, and when he was trying to get the jib in, he got washed overboard. I felt I was right in the middle of a movie. I just watched a wave take him off the deck, and the next wave put him straight back on.
Wow. Because there was no one was about to jump in and try and get him, right?
Well, there wasn't time. I mean, it was all so sudden.
Yeah.
And so then we got the jib down, we got the mainsail reefed, and got the motor on and kept ploughing on. But it was very rough.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so you're describing waves that can cover the...
Yeah, waves breaking over the boat.
Yeah. Could you have turned around and gone back?
I don't know why we didn't think about that. I mean, I've never thought about that, James. Actually, it might have been a very good idea.
But isn't that like the typical thing in your 20s or something? And, the older people will go, well, you didn't have to go. And you go, yeah, I suppose we didn't. That's very funny. And you've set off on what day is it? When are we?
We're on a Saturday.
It's a Saturday, so you've set off on today. So the storm hits. You don't think about going back. You're motoring on now. Where do you think you're going? Do you know where you're going? Can you navigate?
We turned into the Taipo Channel, but it wasn't the Taipo Channel. It was a dead end.
Right.
And that was the final conviction felt then that we were lost. And so we decided that the best thing to do was to anchor up in that sheltered cove for the night. I was so happy to be out of the storm. Once we got into the cove, we were sheltered.
You were safe, right. And the boat's intact.
Yes, and we were safe.
And somebody could navigate? Somebody knew what they were doing in that level?
Well, obviously not.
Obviously not, right? Okay.
No,
So-
and especially we'd lost the chart. We didn't actually have marine charts. We had ordnance survey maps, which are used for hikers.
on that.
Yeah, on land. But again, I didn't find that out until we were underway. And then when Twiggy was washed off, he'd had the Ordnance Survey map in his back pocket. And when he was washed overboard, the Ordnance Survey map went into the sea.
Right.
So we had no map. Once it was dark, the boys didn't know how to navigate.
Yeah, a land map is not much use once you're in the water.
No.
So you anchor in the cove. At that point, what are you thinking? We'll anchor here and we'll just head back tomorrow, sort of thing.
Oh, we just thought we'll get up early in the morning and get ourselves to Tai Po in time for the regatta.
Oh, you're still gonna go?
Oh, yes, we're still going to go.
So you settle down for the night. What happens then?
We had a hot cup of tea and the boys said that they'd put the boat to bed. I curled up in a sleeping bag to be warm. And then I heard the throb of a diesel engine, and there'd been no boats. We hadn't seen any boats since we'd left Hong Kong Harbour. And it's dark, there's no lights. So I jumped up onto the top of the cabin roof to get a better look. And I could see coming towards us this big black hulk of a fishing junk. It's got no lights on, but you can see the outline against the hills behind. And it's coming very fast because it's throwing up a bow wave, which is catching the moonlight. It's bright white. And I heard Mick yell, "We must be on their nets, we'll move off." And he went down to pull up the anchor. Suddenly the shout, it was Chinese, but it didn't sound Cantonese. And they're shouting, and the chunk is coming straight for us. And suddenly they shout, "Hands up or we shoot." Hands up in broken English.
Right. So you could hear that. You can understand.
We could hear, they were through a loud hailer. Hands up or we shoot. I'm standing on top of the cabin with one of the other guys.
Hands went up?
In the movie, you see them shooting the hands up.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like that. I just wanted to put my hands over my chest to protect my heart. I wanted to be as small as possible. I didn't want to put my hands up. My arms were like lead. That was my reaction. It wasn't to throw my hands up at all. It was, I want to be little. I want to protect my chest. I got my hands up, but just as I got my hands up, the junk hit us. They turned floodlights on, so we were blinded, and then they hit us. And then we're all falling off. We're falling all over the place, trying to avoid ending up in the sea.
Yeah.
And they're shouting and screaming because they're panicked having seen us suddenly diving around the place, but we weren't really diving. We were just trying to hold on.
And do you think they rammed you as a kind of defensive or offensive move, like give them a bash, unsettle them?
I know, James, in hindsight, I think they were as terrified of what they'd found as we were terrified of them. They turned out to be fishermen militia. They weren't Chinese Navy boat.
Fisherman militia. Okay.
Yes.
So this thing's approached you. They've got hands up, little shoots. You're all panicked. They ram into you. Lights are on. Who do you think they are at that point?
I hadn't a clue, just too busy trying to get upright, get down into the cockpit, and they're swarming all over the boat, and they shove us in the cabin. And I mean, you just couldn't think. I mean, I'm presuming pirates or something, but I don't think at that moment I couldn't think. A guard came down to sit on the steps of the cabin, and he's saying, "No sporking, no sporking, no speaking." And then we all saw it at once. He had a little red star on his cap. And then it dawned. It was communist Chinese.
Right. Are they armed? Have they got heavy weapons?
Armed, yeah, heavily armed.
Right. How terrifying. Like this, I find the sight of weapons at an airport terrifying.
Great shudders of shock went through my body. My body just totally took over. I'm shuddering. I'm just shuddering. And then I looked at the boys, and the boys are all shuddering. It was quite extraordinary. It wasn't a shiver from the cold. It was just shudders of shock.
There's a little star on the cap. Do you then think these are soldiers?
Like, some of them had camouflage, some of them didn't. So they looked like a mix between soldiers and... Yeah, so at the time, I didn't know. They had camo, but they didn't look like proper soldiers.
Right. Are they aggressive or just they're taking charge? But are they aggressive?
They're taking charge. I mean, aggressive in that they're shouting and waving their guns, even then I could feel that they were scared too.
Right.
Yeah.
They've got you locked down in the boat. What do they do with you?
They took us in tow. We could feel that. And then after about half an hour, I could feel the boat bumping along, and I knew we were bumping into a pier or something. So they get us up out of the cockpit, and we're at a long wooden pier, and ahead we can see the outline of some shacks and obviously a kind of small village. And there's villagers shouting, and the guys that had picked us up, they're shouting. Everybody's shouting, so much shouting, because obviously they've got this big catch and the villagers wanting to know what it's all about. So then the villagers start to stream down the pier with lanterns. There's no electricity. And we headed off up the pier.
Wow, what a sight. What a scene that must have been.
Oh, amazing.
And what's your sense? You said that the villagers are shouting like they've got a big catch. Was there a sort of excitement?
Oh, yes. A huge amount of excitement. And I'm so relieved because I'm on dry land again. And I haven't been shot. I haven't been dumped overboard. I'm on land. So I'm relieved. So I linked arms with the two boys and I said, we're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. And with that, we all started to sing. And this ridiculous scene, we're walking up the pier singing, we're off to see the wizard. And all the villagers and shouting, and they're all gathering round. And that was how we arrived in the village.
I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it? The truths of what you're saying, the way in which we are actually completely different in these situations. You don't put your hands up like in the movies. You freeze, you're shuddering with shock. Suddenly, the relief or something, you perform.
They're just all shouting and yelling. And
they hadn't seen the Wizard of Oz, you don't think?
I don't think so. I think that we were the first round eyes, the first Westerners that they would have seen.
Yeah. And you're not tied or shackled or handcuffed or anything?
No.
Okay. So they walk you into the village?
We're walking up the pier into a small village, and it's a small clearing in front of the village.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do they do with you? Where do they put you?
So we're all standing around, and the shouting keeps. There's so much excitement. Everybody's talking at once, and we're just standing there waiting for them to decide what they want to do with us.
No one speaks English?
Only a few words. Hands up, no sporking. Very few words of English.
Right, okay. So they can't explain the situation to you?
Well, I don't think they can explain it to themselves. They don't know what they've got.
Right.
Yeah.
So then they feed you?
The first problem I had was that I wanted to go to the loo. And I'm saying, is there a toilet? Is there a toilet? And they're all yabba yabba. And in the end, I decided I'd be better dead than wet knickers. So I just turned around and walked, and the villagers parted before me, and I just walked down a lane looking for somewhere. And I got out the back of the village. There were some animal buyers, and so there was one with a door. So I jumped in there and closed the door, and the door was open at the top, and it had a big gap at the bottom. It was full of piglets and pigs. So I crouched down in the straw, and there were so many heads all along the top holding lanterns to try and see what I'm doing. And at the bottom, there's all these little kids' heads. And I just did what I had to do. And then there's this wonderful collective, and then they all start to laugh.
This? I'm loving these sort of incredible human moments.
Oh, it was just amazing. Because then, I could do nothing but laugh as well. But it was just this wonderful sound coming from them of, they didn't know what I was doing. And then,
Yeah. Oh, of course. He needs to have a leak. That is so, and very impressive. You were able to do it with everyone watching too.
I was desperate, absolutely desperate.
Do you still feel threatened?
They weren't going to do anything immediately. I'm curious, but I'm still scared, but we're not immediately threatened.
And what do they do with you for the night then?
They searched us. They put us in a big shed. They start to search the boys, and then Wong, who was the chief of the militia, he took me out of the shed and takes me into a small, dimly lit room to search me. And he's he's holding his gun still. He's motioning me with his gun. So I'm in the room with this guy, and I started to shake again. I didn't like this situation. I don't feel happy at all. So he pulls his pockets out and intimates to me to do the same. So I empty my pockets, and in my pocket I've got a little plastic box with some tampons in it. So he opens the box and out fall the tampons. I am so embarrassed. So then, because I'm so embarrassed, I'm furious. So I try to grab the tampons from him, and he lifts up his gun and his hands up, and he's peering at the tampons. And I'm like, oh. So then he decides to pat me down. And because I was so furious, I could feel the fury coming off me. And as he starts to pat me down, he suddenly realizes, because he's a young guy, he's about not much older than I am, and he suddenly realizes that this is all inappropriate is the word to put. But so he leaves, and he comes back with two little girls with pigtails, and he gives them the tampons, and he leaves. And obviously he's told them to search me.
Right.
So they take out the tampons and they unwrap them, and they've got these two cardboard tubes, and they don't know what they pass them from to each other, and then all of a sudden one of them shoots the two tubes together, and the cotton wool plug flies across the room, and they jump like startled rabbits. And I start to laugh. So then I go and get the plug and I put it back in the tube, and they open the other tampon, and they're both shooting the tampon around the room. And we had such a fun time. So then they want to know what they're for. This is all mime. They've got no English. So I do some very intimate and extravagant mimes to show them what they're for. And they think that is hilarious. Yeah. So the three of us are laughing so hard that if Wong comes in and he shouts at the girls because he's very cross and he wants some order restored, and I don't know if they ever explained to him what the tampons were.
I doubt it. To this day, he thinks it's a child's toy that shoots cotton bullets. Wow. So did they look after you? Did they bring you some food? They say, oh, you can sleep here?
They said we had to pay for food. Twiggy had a $100 note, and he gave it to them, and they said when that ran out. And they bought us food. We had some army ration packs from the boat. And so for the first day, they brought in Chairman Mao's little red book, and they had one copy that had English on one page and Chinese on the other. So they found phrases, and then they asked us to read them out in English. And so we sat around reciting Chairman Mao's little red book.
Do you remember any of that? Do you remember what you...
I think phrases like power comes out of the barrel of a gun, and Americans are... I can't remember all the different phrases, but I mean, they're very much about the imperialistic Americans. And
yeah.
They were very anti-American at the time. They were pretty anti-Russian.
And were you all English?
Yeah, we were all English.
Did they have a sense... Did they just lump English in with just general Westerners, or did they distinguish between Russia, England, US?
They brought in an old man who spoke some English, and he had lived in New York 40 years before. And he got us to write our names down on a bit of paper, and he told us we were okay as long as we weren't Americans. And then he said, are you Americans? Are you Americans? No. And he said, you're okay. He said, if you're not Americans.
So after a day or so, do you feel like a prisoner?
So the first day, we are just kept inside and playing cards and reading Chairman Mao's Red Book. And then the People's Liberation Army arrived with an interpreter. There's no road into the village. There's no telephone line. So they obviously had to go and summon them, and they must have walked into the village. So then they say that they're going to interrogate us. And the boys had said they were civilians. They had dog tags, but they'd put them into their shoes. They said they were civilians. They didn't want to say they were British Army for obvious reasons. It was the height of the Cultural Revolution. I mean, it wasn't a good thing.
Oh, then so they were British Army?
Yeah, the boys are British Army.
Okay. And did they find that out? Did the Liberation Army find that out?
Well, they didn't find that out at first. The boys kept denying it. And then I think on the following day, the interpreter came into the room, the shed we were in, with a transistor radio. Are you British Army? No, we're not. We're all civilians. We're just friends. We're just civilians. So he looked at his watch and then he held up the transistor radio and he turned it to Hong Kong radio. And there was an announcement. The land and sea search for 3 British soldiers and 1 civilian has not turned up any results.
Wow, isn't that amazing? Oh, I love that. You hear the report of the search for you in the village. It's such a movie, isn't it? You've got the washing off of the boat, you've got the fantastic scene with the lanterns on the pier, you've got the toilet scene, the tampon scene, the transistor scene. This is great. Sure didn't feel like it at the time. And so with the People's Liberation Army arrival, at this point, do you feel like you're being interrogated? Does it feel threatening? What do you think is going to happen?
So they tell us we're going to be interrogated and then they say, go to sleep. We'll interrogate you tomorrow. So, I mean, the word interrogation is, I didn't like it.
Right.
But we all go to sleep. I must have fallen into a very deep sleep and suddenly the door crashes open, there's oil lamps and the army is there. Get up. And they said, take one of the boys for interrogation. And then they say, go back to sleep. So we go back to sleep and the same thing happens. So that's the routine. By the morning, I'm feeling very different about things. I am not nearly so confident.
Yeah.
So when it was my turn for interrogation, they were very polite. At that time, the first time, they didn't realize we were British Army or that I was with Army boys. They just wanted to know who my father was. I didn't really want to say much because he was one of the early geneticists and always terrified that he'd go to an international conference and then find himself waking up in a Soviet or Chinese laboratory without a passport. So he was a bit nervous in those. So I didn't know what to say who he was. Then they wanted to know who I worked for in Hong Kong. And Mrs. Church, my boss, I mean, she hated communists. And so I didn't really want to say who she was. I didn't think that an advertising agency was something that would go down well with the communist Chinese. So I'm a bit iffy about that. And then, they just wanted to know how I'd got there, what was I doing, why was I there. But they were very curious. I was curious about them. They were curious about me. But they were not pushy or they weren't unkind or rude or anything.
And by this stage, you've left on the Saturday. By this stage, what is it, Monday?
This will be Monday, yeah.
Be Monday. When did you find out about the search? When's the transistor scene?
That would be later on the Monday because the first interrogation, they didn't know the boys were from the army. The second interrogation was different and they knew they were from the army.
Right.
And the mood changed, definitely.
I mean, it must have been confusing to them in a sense because you hardly look like spies as such, do you? You're ill equipped, you've come up on a yacht. They would have known about the stuff at Taipo or what was going on, right?
No, they wouldn't have known. But I mean, I think if they'd looked at the yacht and looked at us, they wouldn't have seen us as any great threat.
Yeah.
But I mean, being British Army, because of the time that it was with the Cultural Revolution, that could have been a really major incident for them.
Well, let's do the narrative leap out of your live recounting. You subsequently would have found out what was happening while you were lost. What happened back in Hong Kong at the yacht club with Mrs. Church while you were lost? What did people do?
They didn't realize that we were missing until the Monday morning because we weren't due back till the Monday morning. And the yacht club at Taipo, they just assumed we hadn't come. I mean, this is way before mobile phones. They just assumed we'd changed our minds. So on Monday, they realized that we were missing and they started an air and sea search. So my father got a call from the War Office to say that we were missing at sea, presumed drowned. And fortunately for him, my girlfriend Greta, she knew some of the RAF pilots on the search and they kept saying there's no wreckage, which suggests that they're in China. So she rang Dad and said, there's no wreckage. They're probably in China. It could be a very long wait. So Dad, he did a very emotional interview to a British newspaper saying, I hope my daughter's in China. And he wrote a letter to the Chinese consul in London, which I've got, which is just saying, please, she's a good girl.
Yeah.
She can't spell, but she's a good girl.
not very good at school, but so she'll be of no use to you. Send her back to me.
That's right, yes.
I love her. And so does it escalate to a sort of diplomatic incident?
I understood afterwards from British intelligence that they were starting to try and put out feelers, but there was very little communication between the two countries at the time. So they follow up with the air and sea search, and after 2 days they call it off. They can't find any trace of us.
Right. And you're also off the map to China, really, aren't you? You're in a village that's isolated.
Very remote village, yes.
Liberation Army units come down to see what's going on.
Yeah.
It might have been taking a while for that to be communicated back
Yes.
to China itself.
Yes.
Okay, so how do you get released? How do you get out? I'm hoping for a daring escape scene. Tell me you dug your way out in a day.
No, but I think about the third night, the two of the boys suddenly decided it was their duty to escape. And they said the moon was getting bigger every day. We should go right now. We should dress in black clothes. They had worked out where we were, and that the guards had got used to us, and so we should try and escape. And I thought, that's sheer madness. I knew they had not a clue where they were. I mean, they weren't much good on the boat, and I didn't think they'd be much better on land.
Yeah.
I said no, I wasn't going to go with them. And so two of them said they would go that night, but they didn't go. And in the morning, we all agreed then that we'd stick together.
They'd seen all the World War II escape movies.
Oh, they'd seen too many movies, definitely.
Yeah.
Just crazy.
How do you get found? What happens?
The second night, it was again, kept waking us up in the night. And then on, I think it was the Wednesday, they called us in and they said, get packed. And as we packed up and left the shed, Twiggy said to me, next stop Beijing, which is what we thought. So the Liberation Army is all lined up and the militia is all lined up. And they gave a long speech saying that we had been very bad, we had been very naughty, we had come into Chinese waters and then they said, and we're going to release you. We didn't react. I know it took minutes for it to really sink in or for me to believe it. But they said, we're going to release you. And we were to sign a declaration that we would not come back and that we had done the wrong thing, there was no problem in signing that. However, it was then another full day before they released us. And that was very difficult. I found that really very difficult.
Because you didn't believe it?
I didn't believe it, and I started to wonder, and yeah. But so what, they decided that they had to tow us back out to sea, and they towed us back out to sea just as it was getting dark. So they put us all back in the yacht. The yacht had been beached at high tide, so the yacht had a hole in it, so it was taking on water. They put us back in. They had newspapers all over the windows in the cabin. So they put us in the cabin. They made the two older boys sit on one side, Twiggy and I on the other side, and towed us back out to sea. They opened the cabin, got us out. They all said goodbye. We both sang Auld Lang Syne, which the Chinese called the friendship song. So we had been singing that at the village. So we were both singing Auld Lang Syne and waving, and they turned around and immediately went off back to their village. And here we are. They said Hong Kong that way, Tai Po that way. And there we are, trying to get the bilge pump going, trying to work out, get the sails up, get going. And then the boys are like, which way did he say? And I thought,
I'm sure Hong Kong was right. They're not giving me a lot of faith in the British Army, I've got to say.
Well, they weren't the Navy. They weren't
the Navy. That's true. That's true. So you're out there, the boat's sinking. You've got radio? Is there a radio on the boat?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Yeah. And it's dark.
It's dark, so we got life jackets on again, and there was a red light far ahead. And the boy said, maybe it's a shipping buoy, one of the great big shipping markers, which in hindsight's very unlikely given where we were. Anyway, it seemed like a good idea to head for something that was afloat.
Right.
Because we were in trouble. So it seemed a good idea to go that way. So we headed for that. And as we headed towards the light, we realized there were other lights and the outline of a ship. And it was a British minesweeper, HMS Hubbardson.
Huh. Are they still sweeping for mines as such?
No, they were searching for us,
Oh,
but the
right.
search had been called off.
And so the search being called off, but they're heading back to port. Sort of.
So they've anchored waiting for instructions. The search had been called off 2 hours before. They're anchored in Myers Bay waiting for instructions. So we sail up to them shouting, "We're the Peter Ann from China." And they're like, "What?" Anyway, so they let down a rope ladder, and I'm afraid of heights, and I'm no gymnast, but I went up that ladder so fast.
And it'd be like a ghost ship, like it would make no sense to them. There's been no trace of you, but suddenly you sail out of nowhere.
Yeah. So by the time I got to the deck, the great arms lifted me bodily onto the deck, and there was the captain of the ship. And he was fabulous. He just threw his arms around me and gave me the biggest hug. And then the boys got on board, and the boys, everybody shaking their hands and they're thumping us on the back. I mean, it was as if we'd won all the cups at the Taipo Regatta.
Yeah.
It was...
Yeah, what a pity you missed the regatta, isn't it? I hadn't even thought of that now. So you end up on there, then what do you know what happened? Like, they must have communicated back to Hong Kong to your parents, all that sort of thing?
The captain said, "Go down to the radio room, send telegrams to your parents. We've already told Hong Kong we've got you."
Right.
So then the next thing was the boardroom for a drink, and he opened a bottle of scotch, and everybody's having a drink. And then he said, "You better go and have a shower, and we'll get some dinner." And when I went down to have a shower, I was filthy. My face was literally filthy with dirt. And so I had a shower, and we'd all kept a set of clean clothes for having dinner at the regatta. And then we'd kept them in case we went to Beijing. So I had some clean clothes to put on and went back up to the wardroom for dinner. And then after dinner, we went down to other messes in the ship for a drink, and then up to the bridge. And the captain said to me, "We've been in touch with Hong Kong, and they're sending a police launch immediately to pick you up. But there's a problem." He said, "The hills around here make radio contact very difficult." And he said, "I'm just finding it impossible to get back to them to let them know my location." He said, "It's a real problem. But never mind." He said, "Me, you get a good night's sleep." He said, "I don't think we want to go back tonight, do we?" So that was it. So he gave me his cabin for the night, and we went in the morning.
Wow. When did you first talk to your parents?
The next day when we got back to Hong Kong, we had a press conference, and then the army PR guy dropped me back to my flat in Hong Kong. And from there, normally you had to book a call ahead. It took 2 or 3 days to book a call. So I rang the exchange, explained. They knew immediately who I was and put a call through to Dad.
I'm the missing yacht woman.
Yeah. The BBC had rung Dad and told him that they'd found him way before the War Office, because the War Office had to confirm everything. When I got through on the phone, I got Dad on the phone first, and then I got Mum. Now, they've already seen the press cuttings and the photos. And one of the photos that was taken by the Chinese press was of my bare feet, because when I changed on the Hubbardston, my sand shoes were filthy. So I just put them in a bin and I went in bare feet. But when I went in bare feet at the press conference, somebody took a picture of my bare feet, and then this went around the world. And so the first thing that my mother said was, "What happened to your shoes?"
The most significant thing,
Absolutely.
But I'm also surely, did you have a media nickname? Were you known as the Barefoot Girl or anything like that?
Capsized Jill, I think I was known as at the yacht club.
Capsized Jill.
Because I was obviously a very inexperienced sailor, so I was known as Capsized Jill.
Right.
So maybe Calamity Jill would have been a better one.
That's amazing. What was the lowest point in all of that?
Oh, the lowest point was definitely after you'd been woken up constantly during the night. I have never forgotten what an effect that had. And if I'd had any secrets to tell, they could have had them after that. I mean, it's very, very effective.
Yeah. No, I've always thought that. I said, don't tell me anything. I will tell them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so effective, that sleep deprivation. Yeah. And we were all on edge. Yeah.
I imagine something like that could have had quite a profound influence on your life, on how you think about things, on how you see the world.
To be honest, it very quickly receded. As Hoyle, who was the head of PR in the army, he said, today's newspaper's wraps, tomorrow's fish and chips. I didn't revisit it until 2012 when I had to give up work because my husband was unwell, and I gave up work, and I needed a project to get my teeth into, and I went to a writing course, and I decided to write a book, and I decided to start with the Hong Kong incident.
Yeah.
So, and that really was when I started to revisit it.
What did you get out of that?
Oh, I got a tremendous amount out of it because it had all been a very happy experience, and I wondered where all the characters had gone because there was no Facebook. I'd only kept in touch with Greta, my girlfriend. She hadn't kept in touch with any of the others. So then with the internet, I was able to find everybody. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people. And then that set me off on my travels again. So
Great.
I went to the Azores and to Spain and to Britain to meet up with some of those characters, including the captain of the minesweeper that had picked us up, who'd gone on to become a very well-known rear admiral. And he had his press cuttings of the incident, and he remembered it well. So it was wonderful to see him.
And did you find the army boys as well?
I found Twiggy. One of the boys I've never found. One of the other ones has been in contact with me since the book was written. But Twiggy was who I was closest to. I sailed with him a lot. So he was living in Alicante in Spain.
And did you go to China?
I went back to China in 2018 because I decided that 50 years on, when I was 71, I thought it would be fun to pick up the train and go south to Moscow, and I ended up arriving in Moscow the same week that I'd left there 50 years before.
Nice. Did you find the village?
I didn't. I did an interview on Hong Kong radio, hoping that I might find a child from that village that might have remembered, but I couldn't, and I couldn't find my Chinese colleagues at work. So that was the only disappointing thing. And it's probably under concrete now. Hong Kong has changed so dramatically. But it would have been fun if I could have found somebody from the village.
Wow, I want to tell. Well, what happened to the book?
The book, The Hong Kong Letters, it's just been enormous fun. There's been a lot of follow-up from it, and I have found so much else out about the characters, about Mrs. Church, about the boss who took over in Hong Kong. I visited her great-granddaughter. She asked me whether Mrs. Church was actually a British spy. Did I know? And I'm like, no, tell me more. And she said, she was a friend of Kim Philby. And I'm like, oh, really? So, the story just kept going on and on. So it was such a fun thing to do.
Every time I was commenting, it's like, this is like a movie. And it's like the movie said, it is. It's got all the points of a perfect thriller film, doesn't it? Even the release has all the tension in it, and you're stuck on a leaky boat.
Yeah.
It said you laugh, It's extraordinary. So no regrets?
No regrets at all.
None. Like nothing.
None.
You think you wouldn't change a thing. Should you have checked the weather?
Look, if we'd done any of those things, we wouldn't have gone. We got away with it. British intelligence interviewed us afterwards, and they said that they thought we were extraordinarily lucky. And it was just because there was a new rapport starting with the West, and perhaps that China wanted to show that they weren't such bad guys after all.
Or maybe you were so far off the map in a sense that the locals kind of, were they going to take responsibility for shooting you as such? Was it better just to release you? Do you think they got orders to release you?
They definitely got orders. They said they'd received orders.
Right.
But the more likely option would have been that we would have spent maybe 6 months to a year in China. That was what British intelligence said that they thought would have happened to us.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing tale, Gill. So well told.
I wrote a very long and very detailed account of it for my parents in the days following, and that's why I had all the information to go back to.
Gill, fantastic. I loved that. That was so great.
Thanks for listening in to this episode of Life's Booming, No Regrets. If you've loved this story as much as I did, don't forget to tell all your friends in person and online. We'd love it if you left us a review. Of course, if you've got a great story of your own, drop us a line, lifesbooming@seniors.com.au. In the next episode of Life's Booming, No Regrets, you'll find out how a spur-of-the-minute decision led to some life-changing career opportunities, including having dinner with John Travolta. I'm James Valentine. I'll speak with you next time.